Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We start tonight with breaking news out of Ottawa, where the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal has rejected the federal government's $20 billion child welfare settlement with the Assembly of First Nations. With reaction from the Assembly of First Nations and First Nations leaders in Manitoba, here's Daryl Stranger.
The CHRT has stated that the deal did not fully satisfy its orders, as it reduced the amount for some children, left others out completely, and did not guarantee the $40,000 in compensation for each child and caregiver. Assembly First Nations Regional Chief Cindy Woodhouse has been leading the way for the AFN in this case and expressed her disappointment with the ruling.
Today we learned sadly that this settlement agreement has not been approved. I'm deeply frustrated. It's a sad day for the many First Nations families learning today that their long wait for compensation and acknowledgement is going to continue. I don't know when or if compensation will flow to these kids and families at this stage. We had come so close to compensation finally reaching our people, and today's ruling is a significant setback.
Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Acting Grand Chief Cornell McLean called out Cindy Blackstock, Executive Director for the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society.
We speak about every child matters. In Cindy Blackstock's eyes, no child matters. You know, it seems that they're listening to whatever she has to say in terms of how this compensation moves forward. It doesn't seem in her eyes that it's good enough. You know, I'm hoping that, this is fixed in a short period and not years down the road.
Grand Chief Garrison Satie of the Manitoba Kiiwetinoong Ogamaganak also had strong words against the decision.
This is another act that's re-victimizing these children, waiting for compensation that is rightly due unto them. And for them to have that hope of receiving that compensation with great expectation, and only for that to be snatched from them, is cruel. It is inhumane.
Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And we'll hear from Cindy Blackstock in a moment, but first to Ottawa, where there was a major setback for the federal government on its financial package to compensate First Nations children and their families who were chronically underfunded by the child welfare system. APTN's Fraser Needham has more from Ottawa.
Late last year, the Trudeau government announced a $20 billion compensation package to First Nations children and families shortchanged by a chronically underfunded child welfare system between 2006 and 2022. But in a letter issued Monday, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal says it's not enough. And outside the House of Commons today, Justice Minister David Lametti appeared caught off guard by the CHRT's latest decision.
Look, I think what next is we wait for the final decision. This was just a summary today. Obviously, we work with AFN. We work with the Caring Society. We work with NAN and all the other partners with whom we were working. As Minister Hajdu pointed out, this was very much an Indigenous-driven and Indigenous-led process and settlement.
The 15-page CHRT letter says the current agreement does not guarantee all victims will receive $40,000 in compensation and reduces this amount for others. Asked repeatedly if he would reopen the deal, Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller appeared to show no appetite for doing so.
This is much greater than the CHRT decision in itself, and there are some things that the CHRT just cannot do to make sure children are safe in this country. If you look simply at the compensation numbers, the CHRT can only ever accord over $40,000 and under. We presented a package, and we stood on New Year's Eve of this past year working late to make sure that we had a comprehensive package that covered a lot of class areas and a lot of categories of children that they may have thought they would have been included in the CHRT order. They were in fact not.
Minister of Indigenous Services Canada Patty Hajdu said it was disappointing that an Indigenous-led design hadn't been accepted by the CHRT.
There is a continued commitment to First Nations to make sure that we satisfy both aspects of these historic agreements, by the way, and agreements that our First Nations partners have worked incredibly hard on arriving at. So we'll wait to see the details from the tribunal, and But we'll continue to work with First Nations partners on both aspects, the compensation piece and on the reforming the system.
Aside from the $20 billion in compensation for First Nations children and families, the Trudeau government has committed another $20 billion to fixing the First Nations child welfare system. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
For more now on the ruling today by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, we're joined now by Cindy Blackstock, the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. Cindy, thanks for taking the time. The First Nations Child and Family Caring Society is welcoming today's ruling by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, while others like the Assembly of First Nations are not. Can you sort that out for us?
Sure. So you'll remember, Dennis, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ordered $40,000 for each victim of Canada's discrimination back in 2019, and that was upheld by the federal court. So Canada should have paid those amounts, but it chose not to. It decided to strike this class action deal. And you'll remember the ministers going out there and saying, we're going to give people not only $40,000, but we're going to give them more, and we're going to compensate more people. All of that sounded like good news. Mm-hmm. But when everything was done and the final settlement agreement was inked, it turned out that some children, actually quite a few, who are entitled to $40,000 under the tribunal's order would get zero under the final settlement agreement. And a large number of other victims would see their amount reduced from $40,000 down to $20,000, and still others, the entitlement was uncertain. So we didn't think this was fair. Like, the ministers were clear that $40,000 was the floor. And that's what should happen. Canada should pay those folks and then improve the situation for so many other people. And so that was the issue before the tribunal. And the tribunal saying, like we've said, there's lots of good things in that final settlement agreement. And Canada should move forward with that final settlement agreement. But it can't leave people behind. You can't take checks away from children in care and call that justice. Like, these people are legally entitled to the $40,000. So we wanted to make sure that they're included and that their rights are respected.
This has been touted as the largest class action settlement in Canadian history. Today, you're being vilified by the Assembly of First Nations and the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, naming you personally as delaying this compensation. The acting Grand Chief of AMC going so far as to say, quote, "In Cindy Blackstock's eyes, no child matters." Well, what do you make of a statement like that?
Well, I'm disappointed to hear it, but my focus is actually on the children. And the key thing for everyone to remember is that it's Canada that owes the compensation to these victims. And I think that it's in our interest to make sure that every victim gets compensated. And it's not a good message if it's us as First Nations saying to a child, yeah, you had a $40,000 check, but we're going to take that away from you and leave you behind. That's not the kind of work we all want to do. And I really want to support the AFN and everyone else to making sure that we get compensation that's just, but for everyone who is legally entitled to it.
Pretty early times here. Everybody's kind of trying to figure out what happens. Where, Cindy, do you think things go next?
Well, I mean, the government of Canada has even said today that it wants to, work to resolve this and pay the compensation. So that still looks like it's right on track. And I would just encourage the Canadian government to pay the $40,000 to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal victims. That's tens of thousands of victims, Dennis. They've been waiting over 2 years, and we've had, I don't know, like 2 tribunals and decisions and a federal court decision saying pay the money you legally owe to people. That should go out the door ASAP, along with supports to communities to support these victims when they receive the compensation. And then they should also fix the final settlement agreement on the class action side. We're not a party to that, but we certainly support any effort to compensate more people and to give even the CHRT victims more than $40,000.
Cindy, we'll leave it there, but I'm sure we'll be talking to you about this in the not too distant future. Appreciate you giving us some of your time.
Hey, thank you for having me, Dennis. Bye-bye.
And you can find more on this story on our website, aptnnews.ca. Time for a quick break, but first, APTN Yukon reporter Sarah Connors was in the community of Ross River last week. Here's a peek at what she's working on.
I'm Sarah Connors in front of the Ross River School in Ross River, Yukon. And despite this school only being 22 years old, sites like these are commonplace for staff and students. Coming soon on APTN National News, I'll be meeting with the chief and staff to see what their concerns are about the school and what they would like to see done to put an end to all this construction.
Welcome back. An apology ceremony for a First Nation family wrongfully detained by the Vancouver Police Department was cancelled after officers involved in the incident did not attend. Hailsuck Nation says the officers not attending is an example of the police department's lack of respect for Indigenous culture. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
Today we were hoping to be joined by the constables that were involved in the handcuffing incident with Max and his family.
Chief Marilyn Slett of the Hailsuck Nation expresses disappointment that VPD officers involved in the wrongful detaining of 2 band members at a BMO in Vancouver in 2019 were not in attendance in an apology ceremony at their big house in Bella Bella. The ceremony was cancelled when the officers did not show. It was part of a human rights settlement on behalf of Maxwell Johnson and his 12-year-old granddaughter. Johnson says the healing cannot move ahead without those officers.
It's very disheartening to get the news that the 2 officers can't be here without any explanation, and we can't go full circle with our healing now because they chose not to show up.
Vancouver Police Department leaders were in attendance in Bella Bella for the scheduled apology ceremony. An uplifting ceremony for Johnson was held instead. The community members and officers who attended shared a meal. On behalf of the Vancouver Police Board, Vice Chair Faye Whiteman apologized to Maxwell Johnson and his granddaughter.
The board does apologize for the lasting pain and trauma that Mr. Johnson, Tori Ann, and their loved ones and this community has experienced as a result of this incident. I'm a grandparent myself of a 13-year-old, and I can tell you that I cannot imagine the pain of seeing my granddaughter handcuffed.
APTN News contacted VPD and VPD board for a comment, but did not receive a response before airtime. The Hailsuck Nation says they had discussions with VPD and wrote letters to express the importance of the apology ceremony, and added the 2 officers were publicly invited. Chief Slett says the no-show by officers shows the Vancouver Police Department's lack of respect for Indigenous culture and traditions.
When a colonial institution seeks to reconcile and to begin reconciliation together, it is a prerequisite that they show respect for our customs and engage directly with our communities.
The Hailsuck Nation says they are seeking to reset the relationship with police and hope the officers apologize to bring closure to Maxwell Johnson and his family. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
The 3rd annual Walk a Mile in a Ribbon Skirt took place last weekend at the West Edmonton Mall in Alberta. Hosted by Ashley Collingbull, the event's goal is to raise awareness and acceptance of traditional ribbon skirts. The event featured a fashion show with a walk through Canada's largest mall and was capped off with a round dance.
Walk a Mile in a Ribbon Skirt is to showcase beauty in Cree culture and to showcase our beautiful ribbon skirts. They are a symbol of strength, beauty, and sisterhood. We need to normalize the respect of traditional ribbon skirts.
Time for one more quick break. Coming up, an artist wants to transform a deserted riverside dock with a dubious past into an honoring place for the murdered and missing.
We're hoping to plant a forest, a healing forest of spirit trees.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And our thanks to Janet Shear for today's photo. Janet captured some of the beautiful fall colors along a pathway in South Glenmore Park in Calgary, Alberta. Keep those great fall photos coming. You can send your photo to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at Wednesday's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 18 with showers for Halifax and Fredericton. +2 with rain in Kuujjuaq, 14 in Nain. 22 with showers in Montreal, 20 and rain in Chibougamau. Rain and 8 for Sault Ste. Marie, showers and 17 in North Bay. Cloudy and 5 for Thunder Bay, snow and +2 in Sioux Lookout. Snow and +8 for God's Lake, rain and +1 in Norway House. +3 in Winnipeg, 3 with snow in Dauphin. +1 in Regina, 6 in Saskatoon. 7 in Meadow Lake, 1 with snow in Stony Rapids. In northern Alberta, +4 with snow in Fort McMurray, 5 and snow in Grand Prairie. 8 for Edmonton, 9 above in Lethbridge. +12 with rain in Vancouver, 11 in Kamloops. +4 with showers in Prince George, 6 with snow in Smithers. -14 in Old Crow, snow and 2 for Whitehorse. 0 with snow in Yellowknife, snow and -5 in Wrigley. -17 in Sax Harbor, 10 below with flurries in Pawlatuck. +1 in Chesterfield, -22 with snow in Cambridge Bay. -15 with snow in Resolute, 14 below in Arctic Bay. Winnipeg's Red River is a spiritual place for many Indigenous people, but unfortunately it's also been a crime scene where the bodies of murdered Indigenous women and girls have been recovered. A Métis designer from Manitoba has a plan to make the riverside safer and memorialize stolen sisters. Amelia Fournier has that story.
We're hoping to plant a forest, a healing forest of spirit trees, and these would be red sugar maples because they turn red in the fall, and red is one of the only colors a spirit can see. So
Desiree Thériault is a Métis designer from Winnipeg. When the time came to write her thesis for her master's in landscape architecture at the University of Manitoba, she felt compelled to do something concrete for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
When I first started out my research, I was really impacted by the loss of my friends who had gone missing, and I realized that the realm of design was really critical to bringing a voice to those who have gone missing or who have been murdered.
Many women and girls have gone missing or have been found murdered along the Red River that cuts through Winnipeg. She envisioned a revitalization of the Alexander Dock site, where the body of Tina Fontaine was found in 2014. The plan includes a flood-proofed path leading to the forks where the Red and Assiniboine rivers meet, a spirit forest, and a sacred fire that would be lit every time an Indigenous woman disappears.
The smoke of the sacred fire would not only alert everyone, but it would also mask the Human Rights Museum, because not only is it another stolen sister, but it is masking how the human rights, masking the rights of many Indigenous women that are still going missing.
Thériault said the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action emphasize how art can raise awareness of MMIWG, but they don't acknowledge the power of architecture.
The land is such a powerful medium to create space for reconciliation, to create space for memorialization, and to create space for justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
It's not just symbolic gestures. Thériault's plan also includes enhanced security along the river, like improved lighting and visibility. She consulted and collaborated with family members of MMIWG, like Bernadette Smith, a Manitoba MP. Her sister, Claudette Priscilla June Osborne Tayo, disappeared over 14 years ago.
The red has been, somewhere that people they're not feeling the same kind of connection to that water as Indigenous people are, unfortunately, and they are putting people in there to hide evidence.
She said Thériault's project would be a way for Indigenous people to reclaim the river.
Groups still go to that space. And tourists come from all over Canada, and I think it's going to start a conversation as well as educate, people on the realities of what Indigenous people face, being discarded like they're nothing, right? Being thrown into the Red River like they're garbage.
Theriault has submitted her plan to the City of Winnipeg via email months ago, and a representative said that this project is in line with their downtown revitalization plan, but concrete commitments haven't been made.
The only way that things are going to shift and change around the high violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit is us as humanity changing the way that we treat and care for one another. And this is certainly, a project from the heart from Desiree, and she's, helping the families along their healing journey.
Emilia Fournier, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Great idea for that spot. Well, the Canadian Mint is issuing a brand new $50 gold bullion coin, and all the gold for it is coming from one mine in Nunavut. First, here is the coin. It is 99% pure gold and will only be available at Mint boutiques in Winnipeg and Ottawa or from an official bullion reseller. You can't get this one down at your local post office. For the first time ever, all gold for a coin is coming from one source. The Meladine mine, about 25 kilometers north of Rankin Inlet, Nunavut. The mine expects to produce gold from their mixed underground and open pit operation until at least 2035. Politics in Saskatchewan is an uphill battle for First Nations women, according to a Saskatoon MLA. Betty Nippy-Albright is our guest on a new episode of Face to Face tonight. Nippy-Albright says she faced racism when running for office, racism that continues to today.
In Saskatchewan, we're still very much racist. Indigenous people face racism. As a First Nation, a highly educated woman, the obstacles I faced to get to where I'm at is unreal. If I were a First Nation man, I would have been elevated and paraded around all over and saying, look at this person. But because I was First Nation woman, educated, vocal, I was too scary. It was too scary for me.
And you can watch our entire interview with Betty Nippy-Albright in less than 2 minutes' time. And be sure to join us live tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern, when we will put Indigenous politics in focus. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For much more, including more on that Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Stick around for Face to Face. That's next. Have a great night.